I was standing in my kitchen, about to wash the last dish before bed, when I heard it. 3 hard knocks on my front door. Not the friendly tap of a neighbor borrowing sugar. This was urgent. My stomach dropped. At midnight, knocks like that mean trouble. Maybe a car crashed down the street. Maybe someone got hurt. Maybe the police. I wiped my hands on a towel and hurried to the door, my heart beating faster with each step. When I pulled it open, I froze. It wasn't what I expected at all. Standing on my porch was Elena, the woman who lived in the brick house across the street. She had a thin robe on with a cardigan wrapped tight around her, and her eyes looked scared and unsure, like she'd been arguing with herself about whether to knock at all. "I'm so sorry to bother you this late," she said, her voice shaking a little. "My power just went out completely. I tried the breaker box, but I don't know what I'm doing." I didn't know who else to ask. For a second, I just stared, still confused about why she picked me. We'd never really talked before. I'd seen her around, of course. Hard not to notice her. She was younger than me, probably 38 or so, always walking alone, always looking like she carried something heavy on her shoulders. People in the neighborhood whispered about her sometimes. About how her husband died in a work accident 3 years back. About how she barely left the house anymore except for groceries. But standing there on my porch, she wasn't the sad widow everyone talked about. She was just a person who needed help and was brave enough to ask for it. I nodded quickly, maybe too quickly, and told her to wait while I grabbed my flashlight from the garage. She stepped inside my house, just barely, like she wasn't sure she should be there. Her hair smelled like rain even though it hadn't rained in days. Her eyes moved around my living room, taking in the old couch, the TV still on with the volume down, the empty coffee mug on the side table. Everything about her said she wasn't used to being in someone else's space anymore. I found the flashlight and led her back outside. The air was cool, and she pulled her cardigan tighter as we walked across the grass to her place. Neither of us spoke. The silence felt thick, like it was holding all the things we weren't saying. Inside her house, I went straight to the breaker panel in the hallway. It took about 2 minutes to figure out. One of the switches had flipped. Nothing serious, just needed to be reset. But while I worked, she stood close behind me, so close I could hear her breathing. When the lights flickered back on, she let out this soft breath, like she'd been holding it in for hours. Maybe she had been. "Thank you," she said, finally looking right at me, and something in her eyes stopped me cold. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, something that made me think the darkness she was afraid of wasn't just in her house. I should have said goodnight right there. Should have walked back home and gone to bed. But I didn't. Instead, I heard myself asking if she was okay, if there was anything else she needed checked. She smiled, but it was small and sad. "I've been alone for a while now," she admitted quietly. "Sometimes the nights just feel harder than the days." I understood that better than I wanted to say out loud. "My name's Marcus, by the way," I said, even though I was pretty sure she already knew. "I'm 48, divorced almost 10 years now, living by myself in a house that's too quiet most of the time. I work at an equipment supply company, nothing fancy, and I've built a life that looks fine from the outside. Bills get paid. Grass gets mowed. But inside, there's this empty space I stopped trying to fill a long time ago. You just get used to it. You eat dinner alone. You watch TV alone. You go to bed alone. And after enough years, you stop expecting anything different. Until suddenly, at midnight, something breaks through." She looked at me like she understood every word I didn't say. "We should get you some tea or something," I said, surprising myself, "just to make sure you're really okay." She hesitated, then nodded. We ended up back at my kitchen table. I made 2 cups of tea, and she sat there with her hands wrapped around the mug, even though it was too hot to drink yet. We talked a little, small things mostly, how long she'd lived in the neighborhood, whether she liked the area, if her house needed any other repairs. But underneath the small talk, something bigger was happening. 2 people who'd been carrying silence for too long were finally letting it crack open, just a little. When she stood up to leave, she stopped at my front door and looked down at her feet. "I don't usually bother people like this," she said softly, But tonight I just couldn't sit in that house alone in the dark anymore. Then she walked out into the night, and I closed the door behind her. I stood there for a long time afterward, just staring at the spot where she'd been standing. I didn't know what any of it meant. Didn't know if it would matter tomorrow or next week. But I knew one thing for sure. Something had shifted. Something I couldn't name yet, but could feel in my chest like a door opening after years of being locked. For the first time in longer than I could remember, the silence in my house didn't feel comfortable. Felt like it was waiting for something. And so was I. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her sitting at my table, hands around that mug, looking more lost than I'd realized anyone could look. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself it was nothing. Just a neighbor helping a neighbor. A tripped breaker. Cup of tea. Two people being polite. That's what I told myself while I got dressed and headed out to grab the mail. But then I saw her. She was standing by her mailbox, sunlight catching her dark hair, and she looked tired, like maybe she hadn't slept much either. When she noticed me, her face changed. Not quite a smile, more like nervousness mixed with relief. She walked over slowly, her arms crossed like she was protecting herself from something. "I didn't introduce myself properly last night," she said, her voice quieter in the daylight.
I'm Elena Morgan.
I told her my name was Marcus, though I had a feeling she already knew. That's how it works in neighborhoods like ours. People know more about you than they let on. But hearing her say my name out loud felt different somehow, like it meant something coming from her. We stood there talking for a few minutes. Safe topics. The weather getting colder. The potholes on Birch Street that the city kept ignoring. How the leaves were starting to pile up everywhere. But under all of it, I could feel something else. Something neither of us was saying. She kept glancing at my house, then back at me, like she was trying to decide something. I went to work after that, but I couldn't focus. My buddy Jake noticed right away. He's the kind of guy who can spot when something's off before you even realize it yourself. "You look like somebody ran over your dog," he said during lunch, leaning back in his chair with a grin. "Or maybe you met somebody." I tried to brush it off, but he just laughed. "It's the widow across the street, isn't it? Word travels fast around here. Listen, man, be careful. Women with broken hearts, they can either save you or wreck you. Sometimes both." He was joking, but something in what he said stuck with me the rest of the day. That evening, I was pulling into my driveway when I saw her again. She was trying to carry about 6 grocery bags from her car to her front door, and she was struggling. I didn't even think. I just walked over and took half of them from her hands. She didn't argue. She just sighed in this quiet way, like she was so used to doing everything alone that having help felt strange. Inside her kitchen, I set the bags on the counter and couldn't help but notice how empty the place felt. There were no pictures on the fridge. No mess. No signs that anyone really lived there. Just walls and furniture and silence. She caught me looking and gave this sad little smile. "It's hard to make it feel like home again," she said quietly. "Sometimes it's easier to just leave things unfinished." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. And I think she appreciated it. That's when everything got complicated. Her brother-in-law Vincent showed up. He didn't knock. He just walked right in through the side door like he owned the place. And the second he saw me standing there in the kitchen, his whole face changed. "Who's this?" he asked, his voice sharp and cold. Elena tensed up immediately. "This is Marcus. He's been helping me with a few things around the house." Vincent stared at me like I was some kind of criminal. "Helping," he repeated, but the way he said it made it sound dirty. "You don't need help, Elena. Especially not from strangers." I wanted to say something back, but I kept my mouth shut. This wasn't my fight. Not yet, anyway. Elena's cheeks turned red. She looked embarrassed and angry at the same time. She thanked me quickly for carrying the bags and gave me this look that clearly meant please leave. So I did. But walking back to my house, I felt uneasy. The way Vincent had looked at me, like I was a threat, like I was doing something wrong just by being there. I sat in my living room that night with the TV on, not really watching it, just thinking about the whole thing. About Vincent's stare. About Elena stuck between wanting help and feeling guilty for accepting it. about how complicated everything had gotten in less than 24 hours. Around 11 that night, I heard footsteps on my porch again. I opened the door and there she was. Not shaking this time, just tired. Her shoulders looked heavy, like she'd been carrying the weight of the whole world on them. "I'm sorry about Vincent," she said quietly. "He thinks he's protecting me. He doesn't understand that sometimes I just need someone to sit with me, to not treat me like I'm broken." I stepped aside and let her in. She sat down on my couch and I took the chair across from her. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The silence between us this time wasn't awkward or heavy. It was careful, gentle, almost peaceful. At one point, her hand rested on the armrest near mine. Our fingers were maybe 2 inches apart. She didn't move hers away. I didn't move mine either. It wasn't much. Just 2 people breathing in the same room. But it felt like more than any conversation we could have had. When she finally got up to leave, she stopped at the door like she had before. "I don't know what this is," she said, her voice soft and unsure. "But thank you for not making me feel like I have to explain it." After she left, I stood there in my living room, and I realized something had shifted inside me. This wasn't just about being a good neighbor anymore. This was something deeper, something that scared me. And I knew, standing there alone in the quiet, that whatever was starting between us wasn't going to be simple. It wasn't going to be easy, and people were going to have opinions about it. But for the first time in 10 years, I felt like I had something worth fighting for, even if I didn't fully understand it yet. 3 days after Elena left my house that night, Mrs. Patterson cornered me while I was raking leaves in my front yard. She's lived on this street longer than anyone else, and she carries herself like she's the mayor of the whole block. She walked right up to my fence, leaning on her wooden cane, her eyes sharp behind her thick glasses. "I've noticed your neighbor visiting you quite a bit lately," she said, not even pretending to be subtle. "And leaving rather late too. People are starting to talk, Marcus. You know how it is." I forced myself to smile, but inside my chest was getting tight. "Yeah, I know exactly how it is, Mrs. Patterson. Elena's a friend. Her breaker went out and I helped her fix it." The old woman raised one eyebrow like she didn't believe a word I said. "Well, just be mindful, dear. A younger widow spending time alone with a divorced man. You know tongues wag in a place like this." She smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile that said she'd already made up her mind about what was happening, and she was going to make sure everyone else heard her version. After she shuffled away, I stood there gripping the rake handle so hard my knuckles turned white. I knew what this meant. By tomorrow morning, half the street would have their own stories about Elena and me. Stories that had nothing to do with the truth. That night, Elena showed up at my door wearing a thin scarf wrapped around her neck. I could tell by her face she'd already heard the whispers. She came inside and sat at my kitchen table, twisting the scarf in her hands, frustration written all over her. "They think I'm being reckless," she said, staring down at the table. That night, I couldn't sit still. I kept pacing around my house, replaying the argument in my head. Part of me wondered if Vincent was right. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I was complicating Elena's life when all she needed was space to figure things out on her own. But then I heard the knock. Softer this time, almost hesitant. I opened the door and Elena was standing there, her face pale and her eyes red like she'd been crying. "He came to see you, didn't he?" she asked. I nodded. She walked inside and sat down in the chair by the window, her hands gripping the armrests. "Vincent doesn't think I should see anyone," she said quietly. "To him, I'll always be the widow who needs protecting. Like I'm too fragile to make my own decisions. Like moving forward means I didn't love my husband enough." Her voice cracked and I saw just how exhausted she was. Not just tired from lack of sleep, but worn down from years of carrying everyone else's expectations. "Do you know what it's like?" she whispered. "To feel like every step forward is some kind of betrayal? To wake up and wonder if being happy again means you've forgotten the person you lost?" I didn't have the perfect words. I just had the truth. "I know what it's like to live in silence for so long that you forget what your own voice sounds like," I said. "I know what it's like to stop believing you deserve more. But you do, Elena. You deserve to live again. She stared at me for a long moment, and something in the air between us shifted. She stood up suddenly, restless, and walked to the window. Her hands pressed against the glass like she was trying to hold herself together. I'm terrified, she admitted, her back still to me. Terrified of what people will say. Terrified of what it means if I let myself feel something real again. But I'm more terrified of spending the rest of my life pretending I don't want more. I got up and walked closer, but I didn't crowd her. I just stood near enough that she knew I wasn't going anywhere. So am I said quietly. She turned around and our eyes locked. For what felt like forever, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, I reached out and took her hand. It was warm and shaking slightly, but she didn't pull away. We stood there in my living room, the lamp casting soft shadows on the walls, and the world outside seemed to disappear. My thumb brushed over her knuckles, and it was such a small thing, but it felt like crossing a line I'd been afraid of my whole life. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Instead, she squeezed my hand, just once, just enough to say what she couldn't speak out loud. Then, just as quickly, she let go. She stepped back, shaking her head. "Can't," she said. "Not yet." The space between us filled with silence again, but it was different now. It wasn't the silence of strangers. It was the silence of something unfinished, something waiting to be built. She walked to the door and stopped with her hand on the handle. "You scare me," she said softly, looking back at me, "because when I'm with you, I can actually imagine feeling alive again." Then she left, and I stood there alone in my living room, her words echoing in my head long into the night. 2 weeks passed and Elena didn't come by. I saw her a few times from a distance, getting her mail or loading groceries into her car, but she never looked my way. At first I thought maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe Vincent had convinced her I was a mistake. Maybe the gossip had gotten too loud. But late one Thursday night, just after midnight, I heard it again. The knock. This time it wasn't urgent or hesitant. It was steady, certain. I opened the door and there she was, wearing a simple jacket over her clothes, her hair loose around her shoulders, and her eyes looking straight into mine without fear. "Can I come in?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but I could see her hands were gripping the edges of her jacket. I stepped back and she walked past me, stopping in the middle of my living room like she needed the space to say whatever she'd come to say. "I'm tired of being told who I should be," she started, her voice strong and clear. "Tired of Vincent thinking he knows what's best for me. Tired of the neighbors whispering like I'm some fragile thing that's going to break. Tired of the ghost of my husband deciding my future. I can't keep living in that prison." I stayed quiet, letting her get it all out, afraid that if I interrupted I might break whatever courage had brought her here. She turned to face me fully, and her eyes were burning with something I'd never seen before, a mix of fear and determination. "The truth is, Marcus, I'm scared out of my mind. Scared of what people will think. Scared of what it means if I let myself feel this. But you know what scares me more? Spending the rest of my life alone, pretending I don't want someone to see me. Really see me. Not as the widow. Not as the broken woman everyone pities. Just as me." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. She took a step closer, then another, until we were only a foot apart. "When I'm here with you," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, "I don't feel like the widow everyone talks about. I feel like a woman, a real person who's allowed to want things again. And you make me believe I can start over." I swallowed hard, feeling every wall I'd built over the past 10 years crumbling in that moment. "You don't have to start over alone," I said quietly. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. Instead, she reached out and took my hand. This time there was no hesitation. Our fingers wove together naturally, tightly, like they'd been waiting years to find each other. Her grip was firm and desperate and alive. We stood there, holding on, and I felt everything we'd both been carrying. The loneliness, the guilt, the fear, but also something else. Hope. Real, fragile, terrifying hope. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. That touch, that simple connection of hands, said everything that needed to be said. We stayed like that for a long time, neither of us wanting to let go, like the second we did the spell might break and reality would come crashing back in. Finally, she pulled back just enough to look at me again. "I don't know where this goes," she said, her voice steadier now. "I don't know what happens next or how we figure it all out. But I know I don't want to run from it anymore." I nodded because I didn't know either. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have answers. But I knew she mattered. I knew this mattered. And that was enough for now. The next day, everything felt different. I woke up early and saw her outside watering her plants. She looked up, saw me watching from my window, and smiled. Not the sad, tired smile I'd gotten used to. A real one. Later that afternoon, she walked over to my house in broad daylight. No sneaking around. No waiting until dark. She didn't care who saw. And honestly, neither did I. We sat on my front porch with mugs of coffee, the cool autumn air wrapping around us. And she told me about her husband. Not in a sad way, but in a way that honored who he'd been without letting his memory cage her anymore. She laughed at something I said. A genuine, unguarded laugh that seemed to surprise even her. I hadn't heard a sound like that in years. Not from her. Not from myself. It filled the quiet space between us with something warm and real. Mrs. Patterson walked by with her cane, staring at us like we were putting on some kind of scandalous show.
He waved at her.
Elena did too. The old woman huffed and kept walking, but we just looked at each other and grinned. "Let them talk," Elena said softly. "I'm done living my life for them." Vincent drove by later that day. I saw his truck slow down as he passed, saw him staring at us sitting there together. His face was tight with disapproval. But he didn't stop. He just kept driving. And for the first time, I realized his opinion didn't hold the power it used to. Elena squeezed my hand under the table where no one could see. "I'm still scared," she admitted quietly. "Scared this won't work. Scared people will make it harder than it needs to be. Scared I'll mess it up somehow." "Me too," I said honestly. "But I'd rather be scared and try than spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been." She nodded, her eyes soft and grateful. When the sun started setting, she stood up to leave but paused at the top of my porch steps. "I'll see you tonight?" she asked, and there was a quiet certainty in her voice that hadn't been there before. "Yeah," I said. "You will." As she walked back across the street to her house, I sat there alone on my porch, watching the sky turn orange and pink. For the first time in a decade, the silence around me didn't feel empty. Felt full. Full of possibility. Full of something real and messy and complicated, but worth every bit of it. That night, when I finally closed my eyes to sleep, I didn't hear the oppressive silence that used to press down on me. Instead, I heard her voice in my head, steady and clear. "You make me believe I can start over." And I realized my life had already transformed in ways I never thought possible. Not because everything was suddenly perfect. It wasn't. There would still be hard conversations ahead. Still judgmental stares and family tension and doubts that crept in late at night. But none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that we'd chosen each other. Chosen to stop hiding. Chosen to be brave enough to try. And sometimes that choice is where real life actually begins.